Imagine being exiled from your homeland for daring to love someone from another world. Kofi, a prince from Africa, and Clara, a bold American, defied traditions to be together. But their love came at a price. Banished from Kofi's kingdom, they fled to Clara's small town in Georgia, hoping for a fresh start. But here, they are facing a whole new kind of danger. Corrupt officials, racist threats, and a town determined to drive them out. With their love, their future, and their unborn child at stake, they must fight to survive in a world that seems dead set against them. Can they overcome the forces working against them, or will their story end in heartbreak? Stay tuned, because this journey is just beginning, and the twist will keep you on the edge of your seat. The sun was just beginning to set as Kofi and Clara stepped off the plane in Atlanta, painting the sky in warm oranges and pinks. The air was crisp, carrying the scents of pine trees and fresh autumn winds, a stark contrast to the humid plains and sweeping savannas they had left behind in Africa. For a moment, there was a sense of optimism that lingered between them, a feeling that perhaps here in Clara's homeland they could start fresh. This place is beautiful, Kofi remarked as they stood outside the airport, gazing at the skyline of Atlanta in the distance. It was a city full of promise, gleaming with life and energy, its towering buildings reflecting the soft glow of the setting sun. Clara smiled up at him, her hand squeezing his. I told you Georgia had its charms. You will love it here. She led him to the car that was waiting to take them to their childhood home, her excitement growing. For Clara, this was a return to a place filled with fond memories, a place where she had grown up surrounded by warmth and love. She could picture the wide streets lined with trees, the friendly neighbors who waved from their porches, and the peaceful quiet of the countryside. The ride to the town where Clara had spent most of her youth was filled with conversation and laughter. They talked about the future, about how they would build a life here together, far from the chaos they had left behind. The house they were headed to, nestled in the woods just outside a small town, had been in Clara's family for generations. It was old but sturdy, a symbol of the stability Clara had always known. We'll be happy here, Kofi, Clara said, leaning into him as they drove through the open countryside. This place is peaceful. It will give us time to figure everything out. Kofi, despite the uncertainty of this new world, nodded in agreement. There was something hopeful about the air, something promising in the gentle hum of the world around them. Perhaps this would be start of something good, a chance to build a future far away from the difficulties they had faced in Africa. As they approached the house, it came into view, a charming, weathered home tucked away at the end of a gravel driveway, surrounded by towering trees. The golden light of the setting sun bathed it in warmth, making it look like something out of a postcard. It was quiet, serene, and for a moment it felt like everything was going to be okay. Clara sighed in contentment. This is home. Kofi smiled, breathing in the fresh air. It's beautiful. A place we can make our own. They unloaded their bags, eager to settle in. The house, though old, had a certain charm. Its creaky floors and worn-out furniture told stories of generations past, and the air inside was cool and refreshing. Clara's heart swelled with nostalgia as she walked through the familiar halls, memories of her childhood flooding back with each step. For the first few days, everything seemed perfect. They spent their time cleaning the house, restoring it to its former glory. They went for walks in the surrounding woods, enjoying the peace and tranquility. Neighbors waved as they passed by, and for a while it seemed though they had truly found a place where they could belong. The warmth of Clara's memories seemed to extend into the present, filling her with a sense of safety and belonging. But soon, beneath the surface of that quiet town, darker currents began to stir. The smiles from neighbors became less frequent, and the warm welcomes were replaced with cold, suspicious stares. What had started as hopeful new beginning began to shift into something more unsettling. It started gradually, like the first drops of rain before a storm. Kofi noticed it first, the way people's eyes lingered too long when they walked down the street, the way conversations would abruptly stop when they entered a room. At first, it seemed like harmless curiosity. After all, Clara had been gone for years, and Kofi was an unfamiliar face in a small, tight-knit community. But soon, the looks turned to whispers, and the whispers grew louder. I don't understand it, Clara said one afternoon, frowning as they walked back from the local markets. I grew up here. These people know me. They used to be so welcoming. Kofi's gaze was steady, his instinct sharper than Clara's. In this case, it's not about you, it's about us. They don't understand us together. Clara bit her lip, her heart sinking. She had hoped that this town, her home, would be different, that the small mindedness she had seen in other places wouldn't exist here. But it became clear that their relationship, a black African man and a white American woman, was viewed with suspicion and disapproval. The smiles they had received when they first arrived were now replaced with tight-lipped nods, and polite conversation turned cold and distant. It wasn't long before the tension escalated. One morning, as Clara opened the front door to collect the mail, she found an envelope that had been shoved through the slot. She froze when she saw the angry, jagged handwriting scrawled across the page. Go back to where you came from. Her hands shook as she handed the note to Kofi. I can't believe this is happening, she whispered. This isn't the place I remember. Kofi read the note, his expression dark. People fear what they don't understand, and fear can turn to hate. The note didn't stop. Every few days, a new one would appear, sometimes in the mailbox, sometimes tucked under the front door. They all said the same thing in varying degrees of hostility. And it wasn't just the notes. People stopped talking to Clara in town. Her old friends, once warm and friendly, now avoided her. When they walked into the grocery store, conversations would die out, and they could feel eyes on them, watching, judging. One night, everything changed. It was late, and the house was dark and quiet when Clara woke to the acrid smell of smoke. Her heart pounded as she jumped out of bed, shaking Kofi awake. Kofi, wake up! Something's burning! Kofi was on his feet in an instant. Together they rushed outside, only to be met with the horrifying sight of flames creeping up the side of their home. Someone had set their house on fire. Panic surged through Clara as Kofi grabbed the nearest bucket and raced to the well. She called the fire department with trembling hands, but the flames were already leaking at the roof. By the time Kofi managed to douse part of the fire, the firefighters arrived just in time to prevent the entire house from burning down. But the damage had been done. The side of the house was charred black, and the smell of smoke lingered long after the fire had been extinguished. This wasn't random, Kofi said, his voice hard as steel. They're trying to scare us. Clara's eyes filled with tears as she surveyed the damage. What do we do? We can't stay here if we're not safe. Kofi's expression was determined. We're not leaving. We can't let them win. As the days passed, the tensions only grew. The fire had been a message, and Clara and Kofi knew they couldn't sit idly by. But who could they turn to? The local police, indifferent to their plight, had offered little help after the fire. There was no investigation, no follow-up, and it was clear that the authorities weren't going to do anything to protect them. But help came from an unexpected source. Clara's childhood friend, Jacob, reached out to her. He had moved away years ago, but had heard through the grapevine what was happening. He warned Clara that there were powerful forces in the town, people with money and influence, who wanted to see them gone. There's a group in this town, Jacob explained in hushed tones, meeting Clara and Kofi at a small dinner just outside of town. They've been running things behind the scenes for decades. The mayor, the police chief, some of the wealthier families, they are all in on it. Kofi's eyes narrowed. Why are they targeting us? Jacob looked around, lowering his voice even further. Because you are a threat. They've been trying to control who stays and who leaves this town for years, using fear to push people out. And you too, you don't fit into their vision. Clara's stomach twisted. So what do? We can't just leave. Kofi's resolve hardened. We fight back. We expose them. Determined to bring justice, Clara and Kofi started their own investigations. They scoured old records, newspaper clippings, and public documents, piecing together the connections between the town's leadership and the threats against them. What they found was worse than they had imagined. For years, the town's most powerful families had been quietly buying up lands and businesses, using intimidation and fear to force out anyone who didn't fit their mold. It wasn't just about race, it was about control. These families had built a monopoly over the town's economy and politics, and anyone who stood in their way was either silenced or driven out. We have to expose this, Clara said one night, her hands trembling as she laid out the evidence on the table. We can't let them get away with it. Kofi nodded, his eyes dark with determination. But we have to be careful. If they know we're coming for them, they will do whatever it takes to stop us. Clara and Kofi planned to present their findings at the next town hall meeting, but word of their investigation had already spread. The people they had uncovered weren't going to sit idly by and let them destroy their empire. One evening, as they were going over their plan, they heard the sound of footsteps outside. They rushed to the window to see a group of men gathering in their yard, armed with bats and torches. The leader of the group stepped forward, his face twisted with a sneer. You should have left when you had the chance. Kofi stood tall, his voice calm but firm. We're not leaving. We won't be silenced. The tension was palpable as the men closed in, their intent clear. But just as the situation seemed on the brink of violence, the sound of siren filled the air. Police cars, led by Jacob and a few honest officers, arrived in time to disperse the mob and arrest the men who had come to threaten them. In the days following their victory, the town of Clara's childhood began to slowly transform. The corrupt officials who had ruled through fear and intimidation were gone. The tight grip of hatred and prejudice that had plagued the community was beginning to loosen. Neighbors who had once looked upon Clara and Kofi with suspicion were now offering small smiles, tentative gestures of goodwill, and some even began to ask for forgiveness. Clara and Kofi had not only survived the hostility, they had sparked a revolution. The town was now a place where change seemed possible, and for the first time since their arrival, Clara felt a deep sense of peace settle in her heart. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast a warm golden glow across their porch, Clara stood by the railing, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. Kofi came up behind her, wrapping his arms gently around her waist. "Look at this," she said softly, leaning to him. "We've come so far." Kofi kissed the top of her head, his gaze following hers to the horizon. "Yes, we have, but the journey isn't over yet." Clara smiled, her hand moving to rest gently on her stomach. "No, it's not," she said, her voice tinged with both excitement and nervousness, "especially now that we have another journey ahead of us." Kofi's face softened, his eyes warm as he moved to her hand resting on her belly. "Are you sure?" he asked, though the joy in his voice was unmistakable. Clara nodded, her eyes shining. "Yes, we are going to have a baby, Kofi." For a moment they stood in silence, letting the weight of this new chapter wash over them. It wasn't just their lives they were fighting for anymore. It was the life of their child, the future they would create for him or her. A new sense of purpose filled Kofi's heart as he imagined their child growing up in a world they had helped to reshape. Kofi's hand joined Clara's, resting gently on her stomach. "Our child will know both worlds," he said quietly. "The beauty and strength of Africa and the resilience of this land. We will teach him where he comes from, and one day he will carry our legacy forward." Clara leaned her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "He will be strong like you, brave and wise." "And like you," Kofi added, "full of love and kindness. And he will know his history, both sides of it." They stood together, imagining the future for their child. There would be challenges, there always were, but their child would grow up knowing love, knowing courage, and knowing the strength that came from the stories of both his parents. As they prepared for the arrival of their baby, Clara and Kofi found themselves reflecting on the long road they had traveled together, from the trials in Africa to the dangers they had faced in Georgia. They had overcome every obstacle thrown their way, but now they were about to embark on a new journey, one that would change everything. Their child would grow up in two worlds, learning about the rich heritage of Africa through Kofi's stories and understanding the complexities of America through Clara's experiences. They would teach him the values of strength, compassion, and resilience, and he would carry the lessons they had learned forward into his own life. But Clara and Kofi also knew that the world their child would grow up in wasn't perfect. Even though they had brought change to their own town, the echoes of hatred and fear still lingered. Their son would face challenges of his own. He would have to navigate a world that might not always accept him for who he was, for the rich mix of cultures and histories that flowed through his veins. Yet they were determined to prepare him for whatever lay ahead. He would know his roots, and he would understand the importance of fighting for what was right. He would carry the stories of his ancestors and he would learn from the struggles of his parents. And when the time came, he would carve out his own path in the world. For now, Clara and Kofi stood together, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. The future stretched before them, filled with both uncertainty and hope. But with a child on the way, their hearts were full, and they knew that whatever challenges came next, they would face them as a family. The next chapter of their story was just beginning.